All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for taking time out of your day to join us for this webinar on high impact training. I am Karen George, a senior regional sales manager here at StoragePRO, and I'm joined by Sheri Barber, who's our director of learning and development. One quick housekeeping item for you. We will leave time at the end for Q&A, but I certainly don't want anybody to forget what their questions are. So if you're thinking of a question, feel free to go ahead and type it either in the chat box on your menu bar or under more, at least the way that my toolbar shows up. If you click on more, you can go to Q&A and you can also type your question there. So we will have time for Q&A at the end. Um, Before we dive in, I thought it would be fun to start with just a quick poll, right? In doing my research for this webinar, I thought, all right, so what are some good examples of how excellent training shows up in organizations? And of course, what comes to mind is customer service. So, lucky for me, our friends at Forbes put together the top 10 list of best customer service companies in 2026. So, for our little poll, what I'd like you to do in the chat is type in who you think made that top 10 list. What companies that can you think of that you patronize that have outstanding customer service? I think it'll be really interesting for us to see, what names show up on that list. So I'm going to give it just a minute. Again, I'd love for you to type into the chat a company that you think provides excellent customer service. And I am going to read some of the responses that people write. I won't mention your name, but I'd like you to have some guesses here. All right. So it looks like the names are coming in. Somebody said Chick-fil-A. Somebody said the UPS store. Somebody else has said Amazon. I'm gonna give it a little more time. Oh, here's a good one. In-N-Out Burger. Sorry, East Coasters. We don't have In-N-Out on the East Coast yet. I don't think. But it's a burger chain. Okay. Les Schwab Tires, Hilton. These are some good names. And give it 30 more seconds, see if anybody. Oh, Bucky's. I think that's south. That's based in Texas and in the East. I don't know if Bucky's is out on the West Coast. Bucky's is an experience if you've not been there. All right. Well, oh, Storage Pros. Of course. Thank you, whoever wrote that. I appreciate that. Um, so that was fun. So thank you for participating. So drum roll, please. Here are the answers. Okay. This is from Forbes 2026 Best Customer Service List. You can see the top 10. So a lot of those that were mentioned actually made the list. I don't know if, some of these come as a surprise to you. You'll notice I've highlighted a couple in bold, the UPS store and Chick-fil-A. I want to talk about those specifically because those are Greater Atlanta based companies, and I am located in Atlanta. So I am super familiar with these companies. Um, what do these companies do right from a customer service standpoint? Over on the left, in an article written in a publication called Retail Customer Experience, Judy Model interviewed Sean O'Neill, who is the VP of Operations for the UPS store. And you can see, right, in a nutshell, these are the things that they are focused on. Making things easy for customers, exceeding expectations in the moment, and really having a customers first mindset. And then lastly, taking ownership when you miss the mark. And they are number one, the UPS store. So maybe some things we can learn from them. And then, of course, Chick-fil-A, our pride and joy here in Atlanta. If you have not had the opportunity to eat at Chick-fil-A, I encourage you to try to find one and do so, right? I mean, it is sort of very customer service oriented. Anytime you ask anybody a question at Chick-fil-A, the answer is, oh, my pleasure. Could you get me this? My pleasure, right? They've got vases on the tables with fresh flowers. And really, this comes right from the founder of Chick-fil-A, Truett Cathy. His goal was to create a memorable, delightful interaction. And again, if you know anybody that works for Chick-fil-A, if you have teenagers in your life, they're a big employer of high school students. Um, they will tell you that the training and customer service orientation is really rigorous. I mean, they put a lot of focus on that. And as Truett Cathy loved to say, we're in the people business. We're not in the chicken business. So with that in mind, I encourage you to think, as we hear from Sheri, that maybe we're not in the storage business. Maybe we are also in the people business. Let me just give you a quick background on Sheri before I turn it over to her. As I mentioned, she is the Director of Learning and Development. She's been in the industry since 1992 and has held a wide range of leadership roles, from district manager to director of talent management. Now she's our Director of Learning and Development. And she's really built a reputation for driving performance while empowering teams to grow and succeed. Sheri's worked with two of the largest self-storage REITs in the country and five different self-storage companies. So that's given her a really well-rounded and strategic perspective on the business. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sheri.
Well, hello, and thanks so much for having me. It is my pleasure to be here, if I could take on the words of Chick-fil-A. Karen, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And as Karen mentioned, I am a learning and development professional, but I'm extremely passionate about training. And I have a lot of years of experience in the self-storage industry, and that helps me understand the importance of being committed to training in our industry. So a common theme for this presentation is going to be the commitment to training. Some questions that we want you to ask yourself as we go through this presentation is, do you have the right people in place? What type of training are you doing or have you tried? And, what are some of the important KPIs for training that we need to look at, those key predictive indicators? And what type of training provides the best ROI? So these are things that we want you to think about as we go through. And on the next slide, we're going to start talking about how do we build high-performing teams and how do we make sure we have the right people. Karen's right that as a business owner, the commitment to training is essential to help ensure that the business is running on all four cylinders. It's really, really important. Having a standardized and robust training program will not only help you attract good employees, but also to help retain them. So in self-storage, I truly believe we are in the people business. We are a needs-driven business that is likely triggered due to major life events, and it's our job to be able to be empathetic and provide solutions to our customers' needs. So yes, pricing matters, technology matters, but our people are what actually deliver the experience. So when training isn't effective or when we don't have the right people, you'll see it very quickly. We may have missed rentals, inconsistencies, turnover. So do you have the right people? How do we know if we have the right people? Well, you'll see consistent results if you have the right people in place. Excuse me. You won't have to provide constant intervention if you have the right people, you've trained them correctly, they've taken ownership, and a lot of their performance will be predictable when you have employees who've been well trained and they feel they have the knowledge and the confidence that they need to perform their jobs well. So some of the indicators that you do have the right people in place is looking at your KPIs. Are they stable? Are they improving? How are your coaching conversations? Are you feeling like they're evolving and becoming higher level? Are they just a repeat of conversations you're having over and over? Performance should be predictable, not reactive. And some key indicators that you might not have the right employees in place is that you are having those same conversations month after month. And as soon as supervision loosens, and we know in this industry, a lot of times our site employees do not have a direct supervisor working with them. So does the performance drop when the supervision loosens? So there's one important truth here. Effort does not always equal effectiveness. And we have to remember that we can have even the most well-intentioned, best employees, but if we don't have the knowledge or provide the knowledge for them to do the job to the best of their ability, it's a disservice to both them and your business. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about assessing effort versus effectiveness. So this is where we really have to look at patterns, not our one-off situations. So if you assume you have the right people, and let's assume you have a training program, are you using the tools to test the effectiveness of your program? Much like having solid, well-intentioned employees, the best laid plans don't always work if we don't have the right checks and balances. We have to have those in place in order to really assess the effectiveness of the training. So you want to look at some trends over time. You want to perform some call reviews or mystery shops so that you can check on the skills of your employees after perhaps their new hire training and ensure that we're doing continuous training. You want to make sure that you have some checks for understanding built into your training, and that can be 30, 60, and 90-day skill checks or scorecards for new hires. You want to keep coaching logs and communication notes from when you're talking to your employees so that you can ensure that if you have to pivot or increase training or change training, that you have that notation and that you're, able and willing to do that. So having this knowledge is going to help you drive appropriate training to your employees. And a simple question is, if I stepped away for 30 days, would this person still be performing? Would performance hold at this location? That usually can tell you a lot. So do you have the manpower and the program in place to both train your employees and assess both your employees and your training program? This is really important. And it's also important, you'll see on the next slide, to take a look at what your current training program consists of. A lot of times organizations think their training is a lot more effective than it actually is. A lot of focus goes into onboarding, but then sometimes that reinforcement will drop off. So when training focuses more on information than behavior, performance will tend to plateau. And in our industry, where how we behave and the empathy and sales skills that we can show our customers based on the need that's bringing them to our door, this is really, really important and something that should never end with our training. This is going to help keep performance increasing, not plateauing, as long as we have the right training program in place. So you want to take a look at and evaluate what happens after you onboard employees, after their training period. What continuous learning or post-hiring training are you providing? Do you continue to upskill or reskill your employees? These things almost are equally important to onboarding and setting your new hire up to be successful as they go out into the world of self-storage. So are you investing in your training program and your people enough to drive those results and lower turnover? That's a pretty big question. And again, a lot of organizations sometimes overestimate the effectiveness on their training. Now, on the next slide, it just continues taking a look at your current training. So at StoragePRO, we have a very solid structure. New hires will spend time with dedicated and enthusiastic district trainers. We get a lot of support from our district managers. Our new hires, the training will consist of, a lot of different methodologies: on-the-job training, e-learning, quizzes to check for understanding, and skill checks as well. We really focus a lot on everyone's favorite, role playing. This is really important to help instill confidence. So there's a myriad of programs, out there for training, and it's important to keep, new hires and new learners engaged, and to really have that well-rounded training. You're going to want to make sure that you use a lot of different types of programs within your training, a lot of different methodologies, that you're checking for understanding along the way, And that continued learning is key to keep information and performance on the rise. It is important to focus on the most immediate functions of the job during that first, new hire training, whatever that looks like at your organization. So for us, it's generally 2 to 3 weeks. And a lot of times in that first couple weeks, we're going to be focusing on things like systems, safety, sales, policies and procedures, site cleanliness, and the importance of that and curb appeal. How to perform unit inventories and how to make sure they understand incident reporting. So it's important to understand that there are going to be some things that will need more real life and on the job experience or practice for new hires to really understand. And so you want to spend the first part of training focusing those things that are going to allow your employees to go out and run a facility. Once they get more job training under their belt and real life experiences, then you can start to integrate things. And this is where that continued learning comes in, where you can talk about store metrics, marketing, collections, the auction process. The auction process is a very long process, and a lot of times it's hard to understand it, unless you've been through that full length, of the auction process, whether it's 90 days, 70 days, whatever that may be. So understanding this and building out proper training so that we keep employees from feeling overwhelmed and not having to commit too much to memory and not making the whole new hire training process feel, overwhelming and too much to absorb. During your training process, you want to make sure that you include, again, some different methodologies. You want to make sure your program is well-rounded. You want it to be robust. Chick-fil-A, their training is rigorous. So you want to make sure it's robust. You want to make sure it's well-rounded. You want to make sure you're having an impact. And your trainer is critically important to ensure that you can gain quick competency from your new hires, that they're checking and ensuring that there's engagement. And they also help with the retention. So think of them as like your performance catalyst. And remember, having all of this in place is great and definitely necessary. But the real question is, like, are you seeing the training that you're doing now translate into on-the-job results? That's really key, and that's why we train. So let's look at the next slide and talk about how effective training has been. So at the end of the day, it's important to understand the effectiveness of your training. And training only works if behaviors can change and results can follow. So we want to make sure we instill that knowledge and then watch that employee grow and watch the results of your facility or facilities grow, as well. This is really important. So when you're looking and evaluating your current training program, you want to make sure you're focused on the right things and dedicating the right amount of time to ensure employees are ramping up, that they're ramping up quickly, that mistakes are decreasing because we're all going to make them, and that, conversion and numbers at your facility are improving. So do you have and are you putting in the time and manpower to not only ensure that you're instituting and carrying out effective new hire training, but what is your commitment to ongoing training, succession training, things of that nature? Because we need to remember that if things aren't moving, it's usually not the content. It's continuous training and reinforcement. And reinforcing the content that you're delivering is really, really important. Not everyone picks everything up the first time, as we all know. So let's talk about some of the important KPIs on the next slide. What are the most important KPIs for training? Well, this is where we shift from activity to outcomes, from what we've trained them to what we're seeing as the results of that training. So top training KPIs for self-storage is time to proficiency. A lot of times we're hiring and we have a vacancy. And, most facilities don't have a large staff like you would see. You walk into a Chick-fil-A, there's maybe 20, 30 people working, but at facilities, sometimes it's one, maybe two employees. So that time to proficiency is very, very important. Um, First 90-day retention, again, that's important. We have to reinforce, we have to follow up. Trainers have to follow up with their new hires for questions and to see how they're doing. We can't always rely on the new hire to raise their hand. Sometimes people are shy. Sometimes people think, well, excuse me, I've already been trained, I should know this. And so there's that pressure to not look inadequate by raising your hand. Looking at your conversion rates, how are your rentals? What type of insurance or protection are you trying to provide? What upgrades, such as merchandise and lock sales, are your new hires able to garner through their rentals? Quality and compliance scores, incident and safety metrics. Safety is very, very important, especially in the early parts of training, because we send the employees out on the property and there are some dangers out there and some things that we have to be very careful of. And is performance consistent? That's really an important piece too, especially if you have multiple locations. So are you and your training program aligned with these type of KPIs or whatever KPIs are most important to your organization? And are you committing the time and energy to your training? It does take a huge commitment. Completion rates are fine, but they don't really tell us anything if the information that they received through their training actually stuck. So we can push people through training, but if we're not checking to make sure that training is sticking, we're really sort of wasting our time and spinning our wheels. So we want to focus on things like time to proficiency, retention, etc. So with properly trained trainers and engaged, confident employees, that's where the real story is. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about training with the best ROI. So the training that does give you the best return is the kind that can impact daily behavior. So training requires a lot of preparation, people, and a commitment. But if it's not done right, the ROI can oftentimes be, if it's not done right, the ROI can really suffer. But if it's done right, the ROI sometimes can be immeasurable. And you can, get great return on your training. So remember these things when evaluating your training program, because if you want the highest ROI with your training program, you'll want to make sure it contains and produces new hire training that that helps prevent bad habits, that reduces early turnover, sales and customer conversations. This is really important. This is what we do. We become the hairstylist, or the barista at the local coffee shop, or the person that someone goes to and talks to, sort of like a psychologist sometimes. So making sure that we're having those conversations and preparing our employees for those conversations. Leadership and coaching. So this includes everything from district trainers to fellow employees, district managers, regional managers, however your company is set up in the structure. It's really, really important that everyone is involved and constantly helping teams grow and working on training and pushing results. I know whenever I would visit a property, I'm a learning and development person. I'll ask employees to role play with me. We'll be walking the property and we'll stop and I'll ask them to sell me the unit. So there's always an opportunity to have a learning experience in there. And safety and compliance, again, I mentioned this before, but it's really, really important. So we want to remember that if training isn't helping us make money, reducing the risk, or helping us retain employees, it's probably not the investment we want to make. And so we want to look at what our training consists of so that we can make sure we're getting the best ROI. So what does great training look like? Well, on the next slide you'll see You know, training, especially great training, is not a one-time event. It's a system. And we've probably all been through some sort of training program or another. And it's not just what happens during that 1 hour webinar or half day meeting or even a 3 day sales meeting. There's a lot that happens after that, so it's a full system. I talk a lot about commitment to training, and to me, the commitment to training is one of the most important things. Do you have it? Does your organization have a commitment to training? I know here at StoragePRO, it's very important to us. We invest a lot of time and energy into our training program, our district trainers. We involve our district managers. We have big sales rallies. There's a lot of things that we do to help show our commitment to our team and to our training. But is there someone or a group of people at your organization who's dedicated, to your organization to help create and distribute proper training? To look for training gaps when they're out in the field or looking at reports. And is there someone there to help create content to fill those gaps? Again, we have a robust training program here at StoragePRO. We have a lot of enthusiasm around our training, and we provide not only a structured onboarding, but on-the-job training, all the methodologies, excuse me, that we talked about earlier. And we believe that that blended approach helps to ensure positive onboarding, engagement, and support of our new hires as we bring them on board. So effective training is, it's simple, it's role specific, it's reinforced through coaching, it's always evolving, and it's tied to KPIs. We don't want to have training that's one and done, that lives in outdated training documents or manuals. We want to make sure we're refreshing those as often as possible, and we don't want to overload employees with too much at one time either. So on the next slide, let's talk about what organizations miss. Well, this a lot of times is a big one. And we talked earlier about how a lot of times employees think their training is more effective than it actually is. But one thing that you want to remember is that consistency will always beat intensity every time. That 2 week or 3 week training program, that's intense, it's robust, it can be rigorous. But it's the consistency that happens both through those first 2 weeks and what happens after that. So you can have the best training program in the world, but if it's not reinforced, if it's not spread out over time to make it less intense and to make it more manageable, it's not going to stick. And with the risk of being redundant, I just want to reemphasize that the commitment is super important. A simple, repeatable program that's executed well will always outperform, an intense or rigorous or complex program. That training without accountability really just becomes optional, right? We can put training out there, but if we don't hold our employees accountable and follow up, it's just training they can choose to take or not take, or they can choose to take the training but not implement anything that they've learned. So the accountability is key, and leaders, not trainers, will determine whether training sticks. So you want to make sure that even when you have your trainers out there, that those are the true leaders within your districts, within your regions, within your organization, not just someone who's there regurgitating information, checking boxes, and pencil whipping a training program. So you want to make sure that you've got all the right people in place and that everyone is committed. There's that word again, commitment. And finally, let's talk about some takeaways on the next slide. So to wrap it all up, again, the right people produce consistent results. This is going to come with time and energy put towards training. Training should always be measured by outcomes. You need to have checkpoints for understanding and ways to assess your training for both your training program as well as your trainees, whether they be new hires or current employees who are doing some continuing training. And leadership reinforcement is what will help to make it all stick. Leadership needs to buy in and play a part. And this includes being dedicated to allow the time, resources, and people to create an invaluable training program. Being desperate and having that vacancy and trying to push someone through training too soon, regardless of what experience they may have, can be overwhelming and you're going to lose the value of your training program. So we need to be dedicated to allowing the appropriate amount of time. And remember, training doesn't create superstars. It creates environments where people can succeed consistently. And that's really the key. We want that consistency across the organization, across all of our employees, across different facilities that we have out there. So, we want to create that environment where people feel successful and that success is continued throughout their journey with your organization. So, with that, I'll leave you with this. Do you truly have the time, the skill set, the people, and the desire to train effectively? We all want to do the right thing, but sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth, and that's okay. There are ways to get support, including outsourcing a team that can help. So if you don't have the bandwidth or the people power to provide and support a great training program, reach out to some of us who can, because there is help out there. So I just want to thank everyone for their time today. Karen, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you in case we have any Q&A.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sheri. So, as a just quick reminder for those who may have joined late, if you do have a question, feel free to type your question in the chat or in the Q&A. Sheri, we did have one come in and somebody asked, do you generally hire people who already have experience in self-storage?
So, my experience has been that having experience in the industry is not always the most valuable thing to look for. I think we've gotten away from, the retired couple with years of storage experience that's going to manage a facility for us because we're not looking for caretakers any longer. We're looking for salespeople. We're looking for people who are trainable. We're looking for people who have a passion for solving problems. That's really what we do. And so I believe customer service and sales skills sometimes can trump self-storage experience. There's that old adage sometimes that when people have a lot of experience, and this is coming from someone with, most of my adult career has been in the self-storage industry. So, I could say this about myself as well, but sometimes when people have a lot of experience in the industry that they're coming from, sometimes they can bring those bad habits over. Sometimes they get stuck in thinking there's only one way to do things. And so I wouldn't necessarily focus on people with self-storage experience. It's always nice to have, but I believe that self-storage is very easily trainable. What is more difficult to train is good customer service skills, good sales skills. Sometimes it's those behavioral things, being able to show empathy with customers. Those are some of the things you want to look for in the interview process and ask them questions that kind of lead you down those paths to see if they have that experience or how they'll handle certain situations, because we do deal with a lot of sensitive situations sometimes. So that would be my feedback.
Great. Looks like that's the only question that we received. So I would reiterate what Sheri said and say, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to attend. We hope you felt like this was useful and good information. Looks like we have one more question. How do we make people accountable?
Well, that is a tough question because a lot of times, it's dependent on the individual. But I believe that when we onboard people, if we start there and we make them feel that, they're part of a bigger team, that we welcome them to, we like to say, welcome to our StoragePRO family. That we instill them with skills and confidence that they need. I think that a lot of times that's where the accountability will come from, is from feeling confident, feeling that they've been properly trained, feeling like we've invested in them, not only bringing them on board, but as well as their continuous education with our organization. And one of the real ways to check for accountability is through things such as, site visits and walking through the sales process and role playing. If you have a mystery shop program, sometimes that can tell us what's going on out in the field. But it's the constant reinforcement from your training team, from leadership, to meet with the employees, answer questions, be there for them. There's nothing more frustrating than feeling unprepared, and feeling nervous and being given keys to the kingdom a little too early. There's a lot of responsibility that comes from that. So I think if you manage that onboarding and training process and then follow up with skill checks, and additional training, that's where you're going to help reinforce that accountability.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to check one more time. I don't see any more questions, but if you do think of anything else, we've got our email addresses on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us via email. We are more than happy. I did get one more. Do you have formal measurements for outcomes?
Well, that's a pretty broad question, but I think that, we do things in our new hire program, such as quizzes and skill checks and surveys, to kind of check for understanding and see what's going on that will allow us to go back and do some additional training or retraining or reskilling if necessary based on some of those outcomes. The L&D team at StoragePRO does do site visits as well as district managers, regional managers. I mean, that's really key for us as well to see what's really going on, out in the field. And we can hold people accountable there for store results. But for me, being an L&D professional, I just find, having those conversations, meeting with the field, meeting with the trainers, making sure that everyone is aligned, that kind of helps us keep everyone on the same page. But we do have meetings and sales rallies and all kinds of things that we do to help reinforce our training. And we look at numbers and we look at our KPIs. And as an L&D team, we are available to help if there's a district manager or regional manager out there who's looking for some additional training or support based on the results that they're looking for. So I hope that answers part of your question. Um, but there's a lot that can be done, to check for understanding and accountability. So that's an important piece. Like I had said earlier, it's not just a one and done. It doesn't end once the new hires get out of training. So great
Great.
question. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna try it one more time. I don't see any more questions, but like I was saying, if you do think of questions after this, feel free to either email either one of us, and we just are really glad you joined us today. So
Absolutely.
thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.